The smell of fresh basil and simmering tomato sauce had been my morning greeting for 7 years. Every day at 5 a.m., I'd unlock the back door of Marcello's, the little Italian restaurant tucked between a bookstore and a florist on Maple Street, and begin the ritual that had become my life's purpose. I was Marcus Webb, head chef and general manager, though those titles never fully captured what Marcello's meant to me. It was my home, my canvas, my entire world compressed into a kitchen, a dining room, and the dreams I'd poured into every plate that left my station. Vincent Marcello, the owner, had hired me when I was a culinary school dropout, with more passion than polish, gambling on potential when no one else would. "You've got fire in your eyes, kid," he'd said, his weathered hands gripping my shoulders. "I can teach you the rest." And he did. For 3 years, Vincent mentored me, sharing recipes his grandmother brought from Sicily, teaching me that cooking was about love as much as technique. According to YouTube analytics, 99% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. When his health began failing, he made me general manager, trusting me to run the place while he enjoyed a quieter retirement in his condo by the lake. Then his nephew, Derek Marcello, appeared. Derek arrived 2 years ago with designer suits, a sports car, and the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. Vincent introduced him as family, someone who wanted to learn the business, maybe help with the books. "Marcus runs the show," Vincent assured me, "but Derek's good with numbers. Let him handle the administrative side." I didn't love the idea, but Vincent's word was law, and I focused on what I did best, creating food that made people close their eyes in contentment. At first, Derek seemed harmless. He'd show up midday, review receipts, make phone calls in the back office. He complimented my cooking, praised my management style, even suggested a few marketing ideas that actually worked. We weren't friends, but we coexisted. I ran the kitchen and front of house. He managed finances and paperwork. The restaurant thrived. We had regulars who came weekly, food critics who praised my seasonal menus, and a waiting list on weekends. I should have noticed the signs earlier. It started small, delayed vendor payments that Derek explained away as cash flow management. Then suppliers began calling me directly, their voices tight with frustration about bounce checks. "Talk to Derek," I'd say, uncomfortable with the financial side I'd never fully understood. "He handles accounts payable." Derek would smooth things over with apologies and promises, and I'd return to my kitchen, reassuring myself that administrative hiccups were normal. But the hiccups became seizures. One morning, our produce supplier refused to deliver unless we paid our outstanding balance, $8,000. I confronted Derek in the office, finding him disheveled, tie loosened, eyes bloodshot. "Temporary setback," he muttered, writing a check without meeting my gaze. "I've had some personal expenses. It won't happen again." "Personal expenses? You're using restaurant funds for personal expenses?" "I'll pay it back. I just need a few weeks." I should have called Vincent then, should have demanded to see the books. But Derek's promise seemed genuine, and I didn't want to worry Vincent over what might be a one-time mistake. I was 32 years old, brilliant with a sauté pan, and catastrophically naive about human nature. The next 3 months were a masterclass in denial. I worked harder, arriving earlier, staying later, as if perfect ossobuco could compensate for whatever was happening in the office. Our staff, Maria, the hostess who'd been there since opening, Tony and Lisa, my line cooks, Sarah, our best server. They noticed my stress but never questioned. We were a family, and families protect each other. Then came the morning that shattered everything. I arrived at 5 a.m. to find the locks changed. Standing outside in the pre-dawn darkness, key useless in my hand, I felt the first tremor of genuine fear. I called Derek. No answer. I called Vincent, straight to voicemail. I sat on the back steps as the sun rose, watching my breath fog in the October air, until a sheriff's deputy arrived at 7. "Marcus Webb?" he asked, consulting a clipboard. "That's me. What's going on?" "I'm here to post this notice of closure. The property's being seized due to unpaid debts and tax liens. Are you the owner?" The words hit like a physical blow. "No, but I'm the manager. There must be a mistake." He handed me paperwork that made my vision swim. Tax lines totaling $347,000. unpaid vendor invoices exceeding $200,000, bank loans in default, gambling debts. The phrase gambling debts appeared multiple times, associated with Derek Marcello's name, but the debts were secured against the restaurant's assets. "Where's Derek Marcello?" I managed to ask. The deputy shrugged. "No idea. My job's just posting notice. You'll need to contact the county clerk for details." I spent that entire day in a nightmare of phone calls and revelations. Derek had been gambling for over 18 months. Casinos, poker games, sports betting. He'd started using restaurant funds to cover losses, then taken out loans against the business, then stopped paying taxes entirely, using that money to chase bigger bets that might clear his debts. It was a spiral, and we'd been circling the drain while I perfected my carbonara technique. Vincent's number still went to voicemail. I later learned he was on a cruise, one of those deals with limited cell service, completely unreachable. Derek had known about the trip, had probably planned his final moves around Vincent's absence. I called an emergency staff meeting at Maria's apartment that evening. 9 people, the core of Marcello's family, crammed into her living room while I explained that we had no jobs, no final paychecks, nothing. Maria cried quietly. Tony punched the wall. Sarah just stared, 7 months pregnant, processing the loss of her health insurance. "We'll sue," Tony said. "We'll make Derek pay." "With what money?" I asked, my voice hollow. "I can barely make my own rent." The worst part wasn't the lost job. It was the lost dream. I'd invested 7 years, but more than that, I'd invested my identity. I was the chef at Marcello's. Without Marcello's, who was I? The following weeks were brutal. I filed for unemployment, sent out resumes, took a temporary job washing dishes at a corporate chain restaurant for minimum wage. The irony of going from head chef to dishwasher wasn't lost on me. But pride doesn't pay bills. I'd been making $65,000 a year at Marcello's, living modestly but saving nothing, because I'd assumed I had job security for life. Now I was making $12.50 an hour, living on ramen and failure. Derek had vanished completely. Calls went unanswered. His apartment was abandoned, rent unpaid. Rumors suggested he'd fled to Atlantic City, or maybe Vegas, chasing the same delusion that had destroyed everything. Vincent finally returned from his cruise 3 weeks later. He called me immediately, his voice broken. "Marcus, I just found out. I'm so sorry. I trusted him. He's my sister's kid. I thought family meant something." "It's not your fault, Vincent." "It is. I should have supervised him, should have checked the books. I was lazy, wanted to retire, and I let a wolf guard the sheep." He paused. "I've talked to lawyers. The restaurant's gone. Too much debt. Even if I sold my condo, I couldn't save it. I'm so sorry about your job, about the staff." "We'll be okay," I lied. "You're a talented chef, Marcus. Someone will snatch you up. But talented chef, without references from a bankrupt restaurant, without savings, without confidence?" I sent out 40 resumes, got 3 interviews, no offers. The industry's tight and word spreads. Fair or not, I was associated with Marcello's failure. I worked at that chain restaurant for 4 months, scrubbing pans and watching inferior cooks prepare microwaved mediocrity. My apartment lease ended, and I couldn't afford renewal, so I moved into a rented room in a stranger's house, a middle-aged divorcee named Patricia, who worked nights and barely acknowledged my existence. My room had a twin bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking a parking lot. At night, I'd lie there and wonder how life had disintegrated so completely. Depression is a quiet thing. It didn't crash over me like a wave. It seeped in like water through a cracked foundation. I stopped calling friends, stopped cooking for pleasure, stopped imagining any future beyond the next shift, the next month's rent. Sarah, our former server, had her baby, a girl, and I couldn't bring myself to visit, couldn't face the reminder of what we'd all lost. Then, 5 months after Marcello's closure, Maria called. "Marcus, turn on Channel 7 News, right now. I found a TV in Patricia's living room and flipped channels." The anchor's voice was measured and serious. Federal charges against Derek Marcello, accused of operating a fraudulent investment scheme that defrauded over 50 victims of an estimated $2.3 million. Marcello allegedly used his family restaurant as a front to gain credibility, convincing investors to buy into what he called guaranteed return opportunities that were actually Ponzi schemes funding his gambling addiction. The screen showed Derek in handcuffs, being led from a casino in Atlantic City. He looked gaunt, desperate, nothing like the confident nephew who'd arrived with such promise. The reporter continued. Among the victims are several elderly investors who lost their retirement savings. Federal prosecutors are calling this one of the most egregious cases of financial fraud they've seen, citing Marcello's exploitation of family connections and community trust. If convicted on all counts, Marcello faces up to 30 years in federal prison. I watched, numb. This wasn't just about the restaurant anymore. Derek had been running a much larger scheme, using Marcello's reputation, Vincent's lifetime of goodwill, to lure investors. We'd been collateral damage in a much bigger catastrophe. Over the following days, the story unfolded in local news and newspapers. Derek had convinced people, including some of our regular customers, people who'd trusted the Marcello name, to invest in fabricated business opportunities. He'd use that money to gamble, to pay earlier investors, classic Ponzi structure, to fund a lifestyle of expensive hotels and high-stakes poker tables. When the restaurant collapsed, he'd simply moved on, finding new victims, until the FBI caught up with him. The trial happened 6 months later. I attended one day, sitting in the back of the courtroom, watching Derek in an ill-fitting suit as prosecutors detailed his crimes. Victim after victim testified. A retired teacher who'd lost $150,000, a widower who'd invested his late wife's life insurance, a young couple who'd lost their house down payment. The scope of destruction was staggering. What struck me wasn't the legal proceedings, but Derek's face. He looked haunted, diminished, like a man who'd gambled away not just money, but his entire humanity. When the judge sentenced him to 22 years in federal prison, Derek didn't react. He simply stood there, accepting the weight of consequence that had finally, inevitably, caught up with him. I didn't feel satisfaction or vindication, just a bone-deep weariness. But something shifted after that trial. Maybe it was closure, or maybe witnessing Derek's complete downfall reminded me that I was still standing. I'd lost a job and a dream, but I hadn't lost my integrity, my skills, or my ability to rebuild. I started cooking again, not professionally, but for myself. Small things at first: a proper pasta carbonara in Patricia's kitchen, a roasted chicken with herbs, cookies for the other tenants in the house. Cooking had always been my language of love, and I'd gone silent for too long. One evening, I prepared ossobuco, Vincent's signature dish, the recipe that had made Marcello's famous. Patricia came home early, drawn by the smell, and I invited her to join me. We ate together, our first real conversation in months, and she told me about her divorce, her night shifts as a nurse, her own quiet struggles. I told her about the restaurant, about Derek, about dreams deferred. "You know what I think?" she said, savoring the tender veal. "You're not done. This," she gestured at the plate, "this is world class. Don't let some scumbag's choices define your future." Her words, simple, direct, sparked something. I started a food blog, posting recipes and techniques. I offered private cooking lessons, charging $50 for 2-hour sessions in clients' homes. I began catering small events, dinner parties, birthday celebrations. Word spread slowly but steadily. I wasn't making much, but I was cooking again, building something on my own terms. Vincent and I reconnected over coffee one afternoon. He looked older, the weight of Derek's betrayal etched in new lines around his eyes. "I'm selling the condo," he told me. "Going to split the proceeds between the former staff. Compensation for the paychecks Derek stole. It won't be much, maybe a couple thousand each, but it's something." "Vincent, that's your retirement?" "My retirement's already gone, Marcus. Derek saw to that. But I can't retire with a clear conscience knowing you and Maria and Tony and the others got nothing while my nephew destroyed lives." He smiled sadly. "Besides, I'm old school. You make things right when you can." True to his word, Vincent distributed the money 2 months later. My share was $2,800, enough to move into a proper studio apartment, to buy some decent kitchen equipment, to breathe a little easier. The catering business grew. I kept my day job washing dishes. Humility has value, but gradually transitioned to part-time, then quit entirely when catering income became sustainable. A year after Marcello's closure, I was earning close to what I'd made before, working independently, answering to no one but myself and my clients. Then came the opportunity that changed everything. A local food writer named Jennifer Chen reached out, asking to feature my story for the newspaper's Sunday magazine. She'd heard about Marcello's closure, about Derek's crimes, and wanted to write about resilience in the culinary world. I was hesitant. Who wants to advertise their failures? But Jennifer was persuasive. Your story isn't about failure, she insisted. It's about surviving someone else's choices and rebuilding with dignity. The article ran on a Sunday morning in late spring, 2 years after everything fell apart. Jennifer had titled it From the Ashes: How One Chef Rebuilt After Betrayal. It detailed Marcello's history, Derek's fraud, the staff's displacement, and my journey from dishwasher back to chef. She'd interviewed Vincent, Maria, several former customers, and included photos of my current catering work. The response was overwhelming. My phone rang constantly. Former Marcello's regulars reached out, wanting to hire me for events. Other restaurants offered positions. But the most unexpected call came from a restaurant investment group interested in backing me in opening my own place. We read Jennifer's article, the lead investor explained during our first meeting. We're looking for chefs with integrity, talent, and a story. You check all 3 boxes. Would you consider partnering with us to open a new restaurant? I was cautious. After Derek, trust didn't come easily, but this group had credentials, references, a legitimate track record. Over several months, we negotiated a partnership where I'd own 30% equity, serve as executive chef and creative director, while they provided capital and business management with complete transparency. Monthly financial reviews, quarterly audits, everything I should have demanded at Marcello's. We opened Webb's Table 14 months later, in a renovated space 3 blocks from where Marcello's used to stand. The menu featured dishes I'd perfected over the years, including Vincent's osso buco, which I renamed Marcello's Legacy, in honor of the man who'd believed in me first. Opening night, the dining room filled with familiar faces. Vincent sat at table 1, beaming. Maria, now working as my hostess, seated guests with her warm efficiency. Tony and Lisa worked my line. I'd hired them immediately, along with Sarah, who returned after maternity leave. Former Marcello's regulars filled half the reservations, supporting the phoenix rising from their beloved restaurant's ashes. Standing in my kitchen that first night, hearing the dining room buzz with conversation and laughter, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not triumph over Derek. His 22 years in prison were punishment enough, and dwelling on his fate served no purpose. But peace in knowing that suffering hadn't destroyed me, that betrayal hadn't made me bitter, that loss had ultimately carved out space for something new and wholly mine. Derek's downfall hadn't been my doing. I never sought revenge, never plotted against him. Life, karma, justice, whatever you want to call the universe's balancing mechanism, had delivered consequences far more comprehensive than anything I could have engineered. He'd gambled away not just money, but his freedom, his future, his family's name. Meanwhile, I'd simply kept moving forward, one day at a time, trusting that dignity and effort would eventually yield something good. 3 years after opening, Webb's Table earned its first James Beard nomination. The recognition was gratifying, but the real victory was smaller, quieter. The regular customers who became friends, the staff who felt valued and secure, the young cooks I mentored the way Vincent had mentored me. I visited Vincent weekly at the assisted living facility where he'd moved. His health had declined, but his spirit remained strong. We'd cook together in the facility's kitchen sometimes, simple dishes that wouldn't tax him, sharing stories and silence in equal measure. You did it, kid, he told me one afternoon, his weathered hands shaping pasta dough. Built something real. We did it, I corrected. You taught me everything that matters. He smiled. I taught you technique. Life taught you resilience. That's the recipe no one can steal. When Vincent passed away the following winter, I closed Webb's Table for 3 days, something I'd never done, even for holidays. The funeral was simple, attended by hundreds whose lives he'd touched. I delivered the eulogy, speaking about mentorship and second chances, about how one person's belief can change a life's trajectory. Derek sent a letter from prison, his first and only communication. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. The letter was brief. Marcus, I know apologies are worthless, and I'm not asking forgiveness, but you should know that watching what you've built from prison, reading about Webb's Table's success, taught me something. I had everything, and gambled it away, chasing more. You lost everything because of my choices and built something better through character and work. That's the difference between us. I hope someday I can live even a fraction as honorably as you've lived these past years. Derek. I read it once, then filed it away. Not out of forgiveness, some betrayals are too deep for that, but because holding on to anger would only poison my own peace. Derek would live with his choices for decades. I had better things to do with my energy. Years continued forward. Webb's table expanded into a second location. I published a cookbook dedicating it to Vincent's memory. Some of my former line cooks opened their own restaurants, and I invested in their dreams the way others had invested in mine. The cycle continued: mentorship, belief, opportunity. On the 7th anniversary of Webb's Table's opening, I stood in the original restaurant after close, alone in the kitchen, where it all began again. The space was quiet, clean, ready for tomorrow's service. Through the window, I could see Maple Street's familiar lights, the bookstore and florist that had bracketed Marcello's, the sidewalk where I'd once sat at 5 a.m. with a useless key and a breaking heart. I thought about that morning often, the moment when everything collapsed, when Derek's choices stole my stability and certainty. At the time, it felt like an ending. I couldn't have imagined that destruction would eventually compost into growth, that losing everything would teach me how to build something truly mine. Karma hadn't been instant or obvious. Derek didn't slip on a banana peel or get struck by cosmic lightning. His downfall was the natural consequence of choices compounded over time, lies that grew too large to sustain, betrayals that eventually exposed themselves. Justice arrived slowly, methodically, through legal systems and personal accountability. My resurrection was similarly gradual. No miracle, no sudden reversal, just daily choices to keep moving, keep cooking, keep believing that effort and integrity compound as surely as lies and gambling debts. Some nights were harder than others. Some mornings I'd wanted to quit. But I kept showing up, kept chopping onions and searing proteins, kept trusting that consistency and craft would eventually build something sustainable. The phone rang, breaking my reflection. It was Maria, calling from home. Just wanted to say goodnight, chef. Big day tomorrow. We're fully booked for lunch and dinner. Good night, Maria. See you at 9. I locked up and walked to my car, breathing in the spring air. Somewhere, Derek was in a cell, living with consequence. Somewhere, Vincent's spirit persisted in the recipes I'd preserved and the cooks I'd mentored. And here, now, I was whole, scarred but stronger, cautious but hopeful, proven by fire but not consumed. The restaurant business is unforgiving. Life is unforgiving. But resilience, I'd learned, isn't about avoiding disaster. It's about surviving it with your character intact, about rebuilding with the same values that made you worth destroying in the first place. I drove home through familiar streets, past the studio where I'd lived in those lean months, past Patricia's house where I'd remembered how to cook, past all the markers of a journey I'd never chosen, but had ultimately, improbably, won. Karma had served its dish, cold, thorough, and perfectly balanced, and I'd been there, still standing, still cooking, still building, when justice finally came around.